Alright, guess I better finally review Sonic 3D Blast, but a quick disclaimer before I begin. The version I am reviewing is the Sega Genesis version because it is the one I had as a kid. I have not played the Saturn or PC version, and according to Ricky, the Saturn version isn't bad, so for all I know, he's telling the truth. So just remember throughout this review that it is of the Genesis version, not of the other two, and feel free to let me know in the comments whether you think those are better versions or not. Whatever. Anyway, let's get started. Sonic 3D Blast certainly is an interesting idea. It's not your traditional Sonic game. Instead, it features an isometric view with sprites made from 3D renders, similar to Donkey Kong Country or the Toy Story game, which makes sense as it was developed by Traveler's Tales, which you'd think would mean it was good. Sadly, it isn't. I really don't like this game, and there's a few reasons why. See, as a kid, I thought it was amazing. Sonic in 3D? That has to be awesome! So I got it and played it, but found it to be too slow and too hard for my little mind to handle. Hell, I couldn't even beat Chemical Plant Zone, so forget this game. This was the Sonic game I played the least on the Genesis, perhaps second only behind Sonic Spinball, because even as a kid, I just didn't like it. The game centers on Sonic as he travels to this place known as Flicky Island, which has been taken over by Dr. Robotnik. He's turned all the island inhabitants, little birds known as Flickies, into robots, and Sonic must rescue them and save the island. Flickies, of course, first appeared in another Sega game for the arcade, which was simply known as Flicky, and it was a pretty fun game. This wasn't the first time or the last that Flickies appeared in a Sonic game, but either way, I'm getting off track. Anyway, so you go through each of these isometric stages, beating badniks to collect Flickies. Once you collect 5 of them, you go to a big ring and travel to the next section of the stage, where you have to save 5 more. This is where the bulk of my problems with the game come from. That and the pretty bad controls, but controls are so hard to explain. Having to go around the stages searching for these 5 lone badniks is incredibly slow and incredibly boring, something a Sonic game should not be. I'm all for exploring stages, but this game takes it too far. It doesn't help that every time you get hit, the Flickies scatter and you have to collect them again. It's very tedious and very repetitive, and I really hate doing it. Each stage gets progressively harder and more annoying as they all adopt some sort of stupid gimmick. Rusty Ruin Zone has these weird panels that make Sonic spin tornado style all throughout the stage, and you can use this to break through blocks. It's hard to control and you bounce anytime you hit a wall, often into enemies, and you lose the spinning power, and your Flickies. It's probably my least favorite stage in the game, and that's saying a lot, mind you. Spring Stadium Zone is, as the name would suggest, covered in springs, bumpers, balloons, and spikes. Yes, floors of spikes. And bumpers that push you into them. Fun! Diamond Dust Zone is the obligatory slippy, slidey ice world. Gene Gadget Zone is a runner-up for most annoying stage. There's fans that make Sonic float through the air, and a huge slope with moving platforms that are impossible to jump on with these crappy controls. The last zone, Panic Puppet Zone, though unfortunately named, might be my favorite level in the game. Well, Act 2 anyway, because in Act 2 you don't have to worry about gathering Flickies. All you have to do is get to the end of the stage. Though, because you don't have to collect Flickies, there are a lot more badniks trying to kill you. Either way, it's my favorite part of the game. The boss battles are okay, but uninspired. Most of them are pretty easy once you know what you're doing, with the exception of Panic Puppet Zone, which was very frustrating and very annoying. Sometimes the bosses can be annoying because of the perspective. It's difficult to tell whether something is floating high enough for you to walk under or too low. This happened a lot to me in the Spring Stadium boss. The final boss is pretty cool, but also pretty easy for a final boss. I mean, it's the end of the game. It's supposed to be, what, the most difficult part by far? Instead, they put all that in the second level. Frickin' Rusty Ruin Zones. Anyway, you go to the final boss, and it has 5 different phases, each of which you have to fight twice. You go to this weird purple grid platforms floating in a void of nothingness, and just dodge whatever Robotnik's making you put up with, until he becomes stupid enough to float onto the grid, that is. The only hard part about this boss is that you have only 6 rings for 10 hits. The final boss can only be unlocked by collecting all 7 Chaos Emeralds, which means now we get to talk about special stages. And what kind of Adamant Ditto Sonic review would it be if we didn't mention these? Believe it or not, I don't hate these special stages. At all. Shocker, right? I know, I was shocked myself. I was like, what? All you do is run on this bridge and collect rings while dodging bombs. It's not very difficult at first, though they do get progressively harder and faster as you progress. They might not be as fun as Sonic 3's, but they're not nearly as annoying as any of the other 2D Sonic games. Also, playing them is the only way you see Tails and Knuckles in this game. These two are hidden in each level, and if you find them and have 50 rings, they send you to the special stage. Just brief little cameos, but it's still pretty neat. Though I wonder how they obtain the power to send Sonic to a world of bridges floating over lava pits. Huh. Creepy. Overall, this game just isn't very fun. Sure, the graphics are nice and the music's pretty cool, but the gameplay is slow and repetitive, the controls are wonky, and the levels are just annoying. It might not be one of Sonic's worst games, but it definitely isn't one of his highlights either. Regardless, this game does have its fans, so who am I to judge?